Hello, friends. Welcome back to my podcast. Hannah Mae here. So happy you're here with me. We are still in the attachment series. This is an exciting one. It's about belief and identity and attachments to those beliefs and how those beliefs inform our identity. And it's an interesting thing because, why is it that some people do really well in life? Why is it that some people are able to overcome certain obstacles and some people feel defeated by them and some people transcend and some people don't? Like, what is it that determines how well we do in life? And to me, in my experience, from what I've seen, my own understanding and my opinion, and maybe like a blend of all of those, it really comes down to belief and that which we identify with. Therefore, how we see ourselves, what we're willing to step into, what we're willing to move towards, what we think we're worthy of or not worthy of, what risks we're willing to take. I mean, this is everything. What we make ourselves available for, what we manifest as co-creator, because our ideas, which are constantly being generated, are the things that are creating our reality at any and all given times. I had this experience this morning that inspired this episode. I went to my son's 8th grade blessing graduation. They do a breakfast and blessing. It's a really beautiful little tradition and ritual where each teacher, connect group leader, is assigned a group of kids and they choose a word for them and they read an inspired scripture over them. Now they do this in front of all their peers, their entire 8th grade community. It was a massive class this year, and all the parents and all their teachers and the head of school. It's always so moving and beautiful because they are really validating, affirming, and raising these kids up and speaking to the best in them before their community. And I always get really moved by it. And certain words have more resonance than others. Like you can tell when that teacher really received information for that child and those words had such powerful resonance. And you can always watch the kid and how they receive it. And it's also really interesting to observe how the different kids receive it. Maybe like the one kid's more introverted and shy and they have that hesitancy, but they're sort of embarrassed because they're on the spot, but at the same time, there's that opening and they're taking in these uplifting words and you're watching them smile and it's slowly seeping in and it's doing something in their system. And then you see some kids and this was not me when I was a teenager, by the way, but I love this. I love seeing this when the kids are like, all right, I'm ready. What do you got for me? Let's see. And then after the teacher says it, he'll watch it land and they'll be like, yeah, all right, I can get with that. They go, they shake their hand, they get their diploma, and then they move on. Now, interestingly, 9, 10, 11, 3 years ago, when my eldest graduated 8th grade, she had a not so positive experience at this. Her teacher that picked her, interestingly, throughout the year, there was a theme, and it seemed apparent to me that her teacher felt frustrated and threatened by her in a way because she felt challenged by my daughter. Not that my daughter was challenging her because that's so not her personality, but my daughter's really gifted. She's really intelligent. She's like the top of her class. I'm not just saying that because I'm like, everyone thinks their kid's the best in the world. Like, no, she actually, like, on paper, she really is. And she's just such a genuine, sweet, good person as well. But she asks a lot of questions and she wants to understand things and she really wants to figure things out. So I think sometimes she was asking questions that the teacher couldn't answer, and the teacher felt threatened by that and would always make passive aggressive comments to her and say things that were not particularly nice. It wasn't just a pattern with my daughter. It actually would happen with other kids too that she would tell me about. I just sort of listened to her and supported her through that. And we talked about like not taking that on and not taking those ideas on because they were her teacher's projections. And so this is really what happens to us growing up. We can take on the projections of authority figures, our parents, or anybody that's giving us messaging when we're particularly susceptible during certain developmental years of our life that are informing us of who we are. So I was grateful to be able to guide her and talk her through that process. But what happened was, at the blessing, the teacher actually was sarcastic with her, and she praised her, but she sort of simultaneously jabbed her. And my daughter was impacted by this. She acted like it didn't bother her, but I could tell she was upset. And we talked about it, and I was really honestly on the fence about whether I go and verbally strangle this woman or not. But I took the opportunity to speak to my daughter about really just having this be a lesson and knowing that there are going to be people that are going to be threatened by her, because there's always going to be people that are going to have a problem with you shining your light and showing up authentically. And some of us experience that straight out the gate. And we're not seen, we're misunderstood, our feelings are dismissed, and there's a lot of negative messaging in that, and we take a lot of ideas on. And I was thinking about this morning, and this is interesting, but as a child, you just think your parents are God. You're not aware of the fact that they're just humans, and they're going through their own crisis of some sort at any given time. I mean, by the time we're a certain age, most likely they're midlife, depending on how old they were when they had us. Or not. Maybe they just have some other particular issue going on. But they're being challenged, like they have their own generational baggage and their own trauma perhaps, or their own conditioning to contend with. And maybe they have no idea and they have no awareness and they haven't done any work and they don't know how to be self-aware. But we take their struggle oftentimes and we can internalize that. And for children who are particularly sensitive, even if there's not a horrendous experience or a particularly traumatizing experience or a lot of dysfunction growing up, of course there's going to be a degree of that, and there's going to be unawareness, and there's going to be negative messaging and some conditioning that is not going to be optimal for the child, and that's going to be their path and their particular set of challenges to have to work through and overcome in their life. So I say all this to paint the picture of how impressionable we are and how well in life we do is really based on our belief, and our belief comes from those around us that are informing us. Because when we come in, and I talked about it on another podcast around self-esteem, we don't come in with low self-esteem. We come in with different dispositions. Some of us are going to have certain strengths, and some of our strengths are going to call us to be more quiet in our disposition. And some of us are going to call us to be, for example, more extroverted, more loud, more energetic. And that all has to do with our gifting and our purpose and what we're going to be inclined to ultimately do. And I really believe that there's a divine calling on each and every one of our lives. And it's just about figuring out what in the world that is and really following the breadcrumbs that spark joy and the things that light us up in life. Like those are our very clear clues. Those are our very clear clues. That was hard to say. But my point is that we come in open, receptive, expectant, okay? And how we are informed and the way in which our caregivers see us is how they inform us, right? Because they are essentially projecting their belief onto us. Now, they can be unaware and projecting their own stuff onto us, or they can be seeing us in our true light and holding space and holding that container for us to do really well and thrive. I worked with a teenager whose parents gratefully were willing to show up and do the work for themselves also. It is so much more effective when a teenager's parent does their own work, or a child's parent does their own work, because nothing will undo the work of a child if you work with them as a client quicker than their parents, because the child believes their parents, like they're fully trusting them. Not only that, but they are wanting their approval. Their survival depends on their parents' acceptance of them. And so if their parents see them a certain way, even if it's really low and the bar is set really low and it's a real negative expectation, the child still naturally is going to meet it, because the parent is drawing their attention to the thing and the kid is going, okay, I'm going to meet that expectation. There's not a lot of conscious, cognitive, like aware thought that goes into that. It's just this automatic thing that seems to happen. And the child has no critical factor. They're borrowing their parents up until a certain age. And then we start to get that monkey mind ourself, they call it. Actually, I don't like that term monkey mind. It kind of bothers me for some reason, but that inner critic, okay? The child is not born with an inner critic. That is borrowed, okay? That's conditioned. But in short, we are essentially wanting to meet the roles that are being expected of us, the labels, and so you see parents all the time setting, like labeling their children. And sometimes they even seem positive, but in fact, it can really limit them and pigeonhole them. But the child that came in with his parents was really struggling. And the short story is that he had sort of pigeonholed himself into a bad situation by acting out. The parents were struggling with him. He was wanting at a certain point to show up better. He was wanting to, he had a desire to, but every time he would make up his mind and he'd go to school, a lot of the teachers actually had kind of decided that he was this bad kid. And so he would get in trouble over the silliest little things. And it felt so defeating. And he was really upset by it. Now, his parents were able to overcome their frustration and their fear through doing their own work. And they were able to show up for him in a way that was so beautiful. It makes me want to cry. They were able to say, "We believe in you. We are your allies. We are on your side. I know you can do this." And that was enough that really lifted him up, those words and that reinforcement, that they too weren't shaming him and putting him down in addition to the other people. Yes, he created that situation for himself, right? That got him into some trouble, but he also pulled himself out of it with the support of his parents, really just like on the sidelines, rallying him along. And as an adult, if we didn't have that as an experience, then that just really gives us, our work is cut out for us. And this is where reparenting and this is where hypnosis can be so powerful, because it's not enough to just have a nice ideal and say nice things to ourselves and positively affirm when it comes to this kind of stuff, these deeper ingrained beliefs. These are the beliefs and these neural pathways that have really been coded into us and pressed in over time. And I've talked about this in earlier episodes. And it's not enough with the conscious mind just to say, "I love myself, you're great, you're amazing, blah, blah, blah," because oftentimes what happens is those words bounce right off. They in fact can make many people feel worse because, and they've done studies around this, where what it does is it points out and makes more apparent to the person trying to utilize affirmations and address it simply on the surface conscious layer of the mind. It points out the vast gap between where they are and where they'd like to be. And so when they see that more clearly, it makes them feel worse. And those words aren't having resonance for them. So there's another way in. And when we do the deeper subconscious work, the subconscious reprogramming, the hypnosis, and there's many different ways, there's many different types of hypnosis and ways to work with a client, we really get to, in those deeper brainwave oscillations, reinform ourselves and meet ourselves there in our pain, in our sadness, where we took that belief on. And essentially, we are removing old pathways. So in that sense, we're erasing. We're not changing reality. We're accepting reality. And then we're moving forward with the truth of who we are in that new empowered state. When the child receives that information with that deeper healing work, that parts work, inner child conversation, and that reinforming. And it's so beautiful. The other thing that is really powerful and really instrumental in shifting this is a spiritual practice, deepening spiritual connection. Of course, when you deepen your relationship with yourself, that is actually pretty deeply spiritual. So some people who aren't inclined or who have a lot of apprehension with connecting with higher power, God, there's always a way to access that and do that work and move through that stuff, because some people, they have religious trauma, or they just have some experiences that were very off-putting for them. So there's always a way to work through that, and then rewrite those stories too for yourself, and find a God, just sort of like in 12 step, where you find a higher power of your own understanding that's approachable. And that is basically what it is. It's a relationship that is unique and intimately personal to you, and it doesn't matter what anyone else says about it. It's actually nobody else's business. And the other thing I'll say is that the self-hypnosis work that I do and the hypnosis work is really instrumental in deepening your spiritual practice as well. I have been blown away by how it's all so deeply connected, because the subconscious is really the doorway to the soul, which is like, wow, how cool is that? And that makes a lot of sense, actually, if you really sit down and think about it. We won't go down that rabbit hole right now. That's the kingdom within. We enter inward, and that's the thing that most people avoid, and we want to stay disassociated and distract, that feel bad distract cycle of like, oh, I got a feeling, oh, let me reach for something outside of me. So the identity that forms is often for survival, right? It's a protective persona that develops. And we have these different protector parts that can show up. And it's really our nervous system wanting to protect us. And it's actually a very intelligent design. And it's how we get through life. And it's essentially living in a structure that is somewhat of an illusory state, because it's not real. Like, it is, but we've taken on a false self. We've identified as maybe a role that we were put in. Maybe we're not able to measure up, and we've become very perfectionistic, or we've become a people pleaser or an overachiever. If a lot of times, there's a really great book called, what's it called? Oh, Siblings Without Rivalry. And it was really helpful to read back when my kids were itty bitty. And it helped me really understand this, where a lot of times parents inadvertently put their kids in roles by saying what one does, and the other one sees that and says, well, that means I'm not that. And so a lot of times there's judgment in this. And when you say something like, this is my creative one, or the worst actually is when someone says, this is my demon child. I'm like, no, please, like, don't say that unless you want that to happen, because that kid's going to hear that and be like, oh, am I? My son heard someone said to him, I don't know who it was, but they said, you're a real troublemaker. And oh my gosh, this was the word he got, by the way, in his 8th grade blessing was adventurous. And he literally, that lit him on fire. He got this grin on his face that was so mischievous and a little scary, and was like, I'm a troublemaker. And I was like, wait, whoa. I was like, hold on. I was like, who said that? And then I had to work really hard to undo that belief and just fill him up with really positive statements, because he jumped right into that, and he assumed that role. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna cause some trouble, because it actually really appealed to his personality. He's super ruckus, and he's super high energy, super extroverted, and he's gonna do big things. And I always viewed him as a warrior as a kid. He's really strong. When he would fall big. He would cry harder. He would get more angry. But I viewed this when he was younger as his unchanneled gifting. And I was like, all right, I got my work cut out for me. I'm going to have to just corral and kind of guide this and hold this space for him. And so when we hold space for our children, we see them in their best light, then they meet that expectation. When we see ourselves in our best light, and we shift our inner dialogue, and we change the way we talk to ourselves and the way we see ourselves, and we bust those old beliefs, then we no longer have to identify with that false self anymore. And we can step into the role that we're here to really fulfill, and do so joyfully and in alignment. And this really is the essence of what Carl Jung talked about when he talks about individuating. But Carl Jung, and also, by the way, much earlier than this, we talk about dark night of the soul and detaching, which is really the essence of detachment, is to strengthen spiritually and to really come to know our true selves, our true soul essence, and who we are before that conditioning. And we're going to do an episode on the dark night, and I really want to draw some interesting parallels between Jung's concept of individuation and also Dark Night of the Soul, John of the Cross, Saint John of the Cross, and his beautiful poetry that many other mystics and saints have talked about and experienced prior to this and since then, and that we all have the opportunity to step into. But as Jung talks about, it's the process of really discovering your own true self through individuation, and this journey of becoming whole, a whole and integrated human, which is witnessing our shadow that will start to present and the conflict that comes up. Now, we don't have to seek that. It will just show up for us, and it will cause problems, actually. And a lot of times the problems that are being caused can feel really disturbing, but really what we're doing is we're seeing this stark contrast between true self and false self and what no longer works. And that old program that is, or those old programs, I should say, that are starting to malfunction, break down, the survival skills that we've adapted, the personas and the roles that we've taken on that are not in alignment with our higher self, our true self. And so the true self starts to, there's too much disalignment. And at a certain point, and this is why this really shows up in midlife, and Jung actually says that individuation doesn't really start until we're in our 40s. Now, you could not have convinced me of that before I was 40, because I thought, I mean, with all my experience, with all my seeking and my, personal growth journey, I was like, no, I got this. And not to dismiss any of that or to invalidate it, but honestly, I actually don't disagree with that based on my own experience now. And, when midlife crisis hits, people view that as crisis, but it doesn't have to be crisis. It's only crisis if we continue to disassociate and therefore create crisis out of it. But actually, if we face our shadow honestly and are willing to move towards that and come back to the truth of who we are, to identify the true from the false, what ideas and conditionings, these false beliefs that we've taken on, to do that work, to press into that, to get present with ourselves and come to know ourselves and walk through, as St. John of the Cross talks about, this passage, this dark night, where for a period of time we really do walk empty-handed, then we come to know the truth of who we are. And it's only in that space that the true light can really come in and we can differentiate it from the false light. But when we do this integration and we become inwardly anchored, we're so grounded. And of course, there's always more, being that we're human and there's no cap on this stuff. And the goal is not perfection, but inner coherence, coming more into alignment, more into our true nature and into our center. And this is not a path that we walk alone, of course, and we're not supposed to walk alone. And actually, I think part of the goal and the purpose and the point of this work is to really enter back into humanity whole, in connection, whole, and then give back in a way that really serves the whole and helps elevate the collective, which is really powerful and really amazing. And then, of course, our relationships along the way are going to be what challenges this, which is why I think in so many relationships, like in marriage, a lot of times relationships disintegrate at this point because our relationships reflect back to us this disalignment and our shadow, and they hold up this mirror. And so a lot of times people think they're falling out of love, and maybe they have been on the receiving end or they've been unfaithful. And it's a lot to face, to come face to face with our shadow, to come face to face with the false beliefs that we've taken on, to confront that stuff, to grieve that, to face our stuff, to get free of it. I mean, I think the biggest challenge in it, I was talking to a friend recently who has really struggled and walked through a lot of darkness, because I believe that this person is a really sensitive soul and really called to come into alignment. But the challenge has been so real. And I experienced this myself, and I witnessed it with people in recovery, because on the recovery journey of separating. We're going to do an episode on addiction and identity as well, and attachments, because like addiction is the mother attachment, and that's of course very belief driven too. It's just an extreme manifestation of it in certain personalities where it shows up. But I was talking to my friend and I was saying the biggest struggle is usually in the resistance that we have to the struggle. That's actually the cause of most of our pain and suffering. Just like in child's birth, you can have one of two different experiences. If you become fearful and you feel something is a threat, then you can become tense, and then you can actually spiral yourself into unbearable pain where you feel very dominated by that experience, and it manifests as pain because you're actually going against the system that's designed to unfold with relaxation. Okay. And so when you can shift and soften and become deeply relaxed, which can feel challenging to do once you start to get gripped and your nervous system starts to want to protect you, and you start to get tense and you go into that fight, flight, or freeze, then if you can relax and soften, then the pain will slowly diminish and you can actually have an elative, really joyful, amazing, even ecstatic birth. Your whole inner cocktail, like chemical serum kicks in, and it's like brain drugs for you, and you're going to be high for days off of that. And I know that because I experienced it. I experienced it both ways. It's very real, and we have the power and the ability to do it, utilizing by stepping into agency in our mind. But it does take some. We're not supposed to do that alone. We need support with that. I coached a friend in her birth, and she asked me to be at her birth. And so we had done a little hypnosis work with it beforehand. And she really believed and knew that she could do it, right? She had some fear, but she believed and knew she could do it. And as she was moving through her labor, which she did really beautifully, sometimes it would start to become, the sensations would start to become stronger, and she would get afraid. And then her husband would call me in and say, "Hey, can you come talk to her?" And I'd be like, "Sure." So I actually had my kids in the main house, and she was in our guest house having her baby. And I would run over and I'd be like, "Okay." And I'd get present with her, and I would just infuse the truth to her, which was, "You're capable. Your body was made to do this." And I would guide her through relaxing. And I would watch her with intention let go. You know, she believed me. She took those words in and she let go. And then she moved back into ease in her labor. It was really beautiful. I was so grateful to be able to do that. One day, maybe I'll do doula work, but I still have little kids that wake me up at night. So I don't think it's in the cards yet. Anyways, I've gone a lot of directions with this. Have a little foreshadowing for future episodes, so stick around. Your nervous system, your energy field, your beliefs, your body, all systems are designed to work in harmony. You know, how you treat yourself, how you allow others to treat you is going to be determined by your belief, what you believe you're worthy of, how you believe you should be treated. And, you know, it's sort of like which came first, the chicken or the egg. Like sometimes we need to step into action and start to create some change for ourselves to shift our own feeling state and elevate our own frequency by, yes, speaking kind words. Like affirmations aren't just solely going to do it, but they can be incredibly supportive when they're done in the correct way. And of course, the deeper subconscious work of really meeting ourselves and reinforming and coming into new belief and understanding and zapping those old beliefs, and then coming to know a new truth, seeing the stories, seeing the lies. In short, you are not the roles that you have played. You are not the roles you have been assigned. It is okay to change your mind. It is okay to be humble and say, "I was wrong." And a lot of it really just comes down to being misinformed. But now the only person misinforming us now is ourself, right? So now we have the responsibility to like step in an aware way to meet ourselves and to change what needs to be changed and support ourselves in the way we need to support ourselves in order to be successful. And, you know, you're not the belief system you inherited either, by the way. And You're not who others see you as, unless that's who you're being, unless that's who you're choosing and agreeing to believe. So if other people see you a certain way, you can be in agreement to that and allow that to dictate your state. But you might need to change your friend group. You know what I'm saying? You might need to have some boundaries. I've done some episodes on boundaries, people pleasing, and harmful toxic dynamics. Naturally, when we start stepping into alignment, some of those relationships are going to start falling away. And the things that don't align and support us in who we are and the truth of who we are, we should give less attention to. And we're not wrong for doing that, right? Doesn't mean we have to be unkind or cut anyone off, but maybe you do have to cut someone off. Like, I've had to say goodbye to people that did not support the higher trajectory, the higher road and path that I was wanting to be on. And you know if they're your cheerleaders or not, because they're going to support you in that, in your best version of yourself. If they're going to be discouraging, judgmental, and they're not happy for you, then, you know, that's just their own stuff getting in the way. But that kind of energy is going to interfere with your process. And if it is, then, you know, it's good to have some discernment around that and take better care of yourself. And you are perfectly within your right to do that. Not only that, but you actually owe it to yourself to do that. Otherwise, you're just impeding your progress if you don't. So the journey into the truth, you really have to like wield a sword, spiritually speaking. It's not about fighting and striving. That's not what I mean. What I mean is it takes a lot of courage. So you want to go in like armored, you know, and a spiritual practice is extremely beneficial and helpful for this, because what is your source? Like, what is your power source? And growing this, and I love working with clients in finding this for themselves and moving through their doubts or their fears around it, because it really is a belief that's going to be totally unique and personal to you. And it's really nobody else's business. And anybody else's projections, judgments has nothing to do with it. It's about meeting yourself where you're at in that work and having that to anchor you and sustain you. And really, the more you move into yourself and get to know yourself, the more you're going to get to know that power. So that is it, my friends. I'm going to stop talking and I'll see you next time for the next one. Maybe it'll be on, I'm not going to tell you what it's on. It's going to be good though. I love you guys. Have a great, fantastic week. Happy Mother's Day. Blessings to you. The world would not be what it is without amazing mothers. I'm so grateful for my own motherhood journey. My children have just shaped me and just helped me grow so much. So motherhood is such a gift. And yeah, I look forward to your feedback. Have a great week.